Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about evolution. So let's get straight to it. When we look at all life on Earth, such as animals, they are all related because they share a common ancestry. However, they didn't always look the way they do today, and yet they have many similarities. They are the results of changes over time. For example, let's take a look at the skeletons of some animals. In this case, the bones of a limb such as an arm. A horse, a mole, a cat, a whale, a frog, a bat, a bird, and a human. Although they are not entirely the same species, they all have a similar bone structure. Take a look at your own arm and see for yourself. The single bone of the upper arm and the wrist has two bones. This is one of the many examples of the similarities we share with the living things on Earth. Now let us take our investigation further by examining two of the biggest animals on Earth. Let's take a look at the whale. Where did this magnificent creature come from? The answer is simple. It evolved. Millions of years ago, the whale looked more like a hoofed animal like a deer around 50 million years ago. It was called an Indoheus. Long before the first humans, this four-legged herbivore would seek refuge in water to either escape from danger or to feed. The Indoheus is a relative of the chevrotain. As the Indoheus spent more time in the water and learned how to swim, it began to develop webbed legs to enable it to navigate underwater better. It evolved to become the Ambulocetus. I think that's how you pronounce it. It had a long mouth and sharp teeth. Why? Since it lived underwater most of the time, it ate a lot of fish. It went from being a herbivore to a carnivore. It simply evolved by adapting to its environment. As time went by, they had to swim greater distances, as well as swim deeper in the ocean. In order to achieve this, they grew larger in size. Every summer, the ice caps in the northern hemisphere would release plankton into the water which the whales would eat. Hence, it is through evolution that we have the whales we see today. Now let's take a look at the elephant. One of the earliest elephants was known as the Erytherium, which lived around 60 million years ago. One thing to note is that they had small pointed ears and they were covered in hair. It had no tusks, no trunk, no big ears. However, they did have sharp canine teeth, which would later become the tusks of the elephants we are familiar with today. As time went by, they grew in size. Some lived in swamps while others lived in forests. Eventually, they evolved into the Barytherium around 35 million years ago. It developed a longer forehead, it had a longer snout, which would later become the trunk. After that, it would become the Deinotheriidae, a bizarre creature with tusks pointing downwards. Later, it would become the Loxodonta, which is what we recognize today. Its tusks begin from where the canine teeth used to be and has larger ears. These are what we know of as the African elephants. Meanwhile, the Indian elephant has a dome-shaped forehead and smaller ears. As a side note, there is even evidence of the dwarf elephant in Cyprus. They were smaller elephants, their height was shorter than a man's, they were 2 meters long, until they became extinct due to hunting as recently as 11,000 years ago. All this time, the elephants were herbivores that lived on land. So there we have it. The elephant we see is a result of millions of years of evolution. It went through many changes and adapting in order to become what it is today. To me, the elephant is the real king of the jungle. It is the biggest animal that walks the earth. They are gentle giants. Elephants are kind to all the animals, which is why, despite being the biggest, they are merciful and most empathetic of all creatures. The elephant and the whale complement each other beautifully. One rules the lands, the other rules the seas. They are both the largest animals that dominate their elemental territories. The yin-yang of the animal kingdom, which is something I talked about in a previous video. Now, this raises another question. How did they survive all this time? The answer is simple. They evolved through a process called natural selection. This theory came from Charles Darwin during the 1800s while he was traveling around the world on the HMS Beagle. He observed the features and behaviors of each animal he encountered everywhere the Beagle ship went. This enabled him to carry out research on geology and natural history. What Charles Darwin found was that natural selection is a process in which animals chose their breeding partners accordingly in order to reproduce and survive. There are several reasons why certain animals were able to breed while others did not. There is competition over resources, which leads to conflict. There is adaptability. Thus, the stronger sex prevails and reproduces. That's what natural selection is. So, going back to the whale, how do they compete in order to breed? The males would engage in displays of dominance to attract the attention of the females, such as lunging out of the water, fin flapping, and singing. The females play a role by choosing mates based on various factors, such as strength, size, and overall fitness of the males. In short, the whales fight for supremacy in order for the female to select and breed with a good partner so they can have strong babies in order to survive and pass on their genes. It is through the process of natural selection that the whales still survive to this day. While we are on the subject of natural selection, let's briefly look at the elephant again. Male elephants have to fight in order to compete for female attention. They fight, they push against each other, ramming into each other, wrestle even. All of these are displays of strength and dominance. The weaker males are pushed out. Once again, only the strongest elephants get to breed. What we see here are the parallels of natural selection, different species of animals fighting for dominance in order to reproduce. Hence, the strongest males pass on their genes. Interestingly enough, both a baby whale and a baby elephant are both known as a calf. Speaking of natural selection and mating rituals, not all adaptabilities and innovations are advantageous. There can also be disadvantages. Let's take a look at the peacock, for example. The male has to have a large and beautiful tail to display in order to attract the female peahens. However, the disadvantages are the following. Firstly, having an extremely large tail inhibits its ability to move around. The bigger the tail, the heavier it gets, the less able it is to move. Secondly, this makes the peacock an easy target for predators such as wild cats and dogs, foxes and mongooses. Thirdly, having an extremely large tail requires a lot of food and energy to maintain. Therefore, it is not economical. There is simply not enough resources for such a thing. Although for a peacock, it's not good to have a small tail either. The lesson here is that there is a need for balance. Once again, this is Mother Nature's way of telling us that moderation is better than extremes. This all relates to what I talked about in my previous video about the yin-yang, the ultimate natural law. Now, you might be wondering, how do we know if any of this is true? Or shouldn't there be some kind of evidence? Where's the proof? How can it be proven? The answer is simple. Fossils and DNA, to name a few. When we look at the remains of creatures that once lived, we see anatomical similarities. There are bones, teeth, and skulls that resemble other animals. But how do we know these changes took place over millions of years? It's simple. We look at a branch of science known as paleontology. Layers of rocks indicate what animal lived how many years ago. The further down you go, the older the fossils are. In each year, you will find fossils of different species of animals. We know they are related by looking at the genes and the molecules of protein in the bones. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the similar bone structures of animals. Therefore, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution has an overwhelming amount of evidence. So where does that leave us humans? Where did we evolve from? According to all the evidence collected and analyzed from fossils and DNA, humans evolved from monkeys such as chimpanzees and gorillas. They evolved from primates, which evolved from rodents. Over the last billions of years, we went from cells to fish, from fish to amphibians, amphibians to reptiles, from reptiles to mammals. We are still evolving to this day. At one point in our biological history, we were small little monkeys that lived in trees called the platyrrhines or platyrrhines, also known as the New World monkeys. These are social monkeys that ate fruits and insects. But why did they live in trees? Trees were a safe home for these monkeys, which gave them protection from predators. These predators were leopards, snakes, and eagles. Whenever these little monkeys saw one of these predators, they would let out a distinctive call to warn others of the predator's presence. When they saw a snake on the ground, they scream out a call to alert them of the snake that made them climb up the trees. When they climbed up to the top of the tree, they would alert others when they spotted an eagle. But even the trees were not completely safe from predators. Leopards would climb up trees as well. They too would prey on these little monkeys. Once again, when a leopard is spotted, the platyrrhines would let out a call to alert the others of the leopard's presence, to enable them to scatter to thinner branches of the trees that cannot hold the leopard's weight. Some scientists say that this is a possible origin of how we developed language. As time went by, these monkeys learned to survive by cooperating with each other. As they grew larger in size, once again, Mother Nature favored the larger animal. Eagles could no longer catch one of these monkeys to carry it to its nest. The leopard cannot overpower a group of monkeys. Eventually, the larger monkeys made their way down to live on the ground and learned how to walk on two legs. They learned to overcome prey through hunting. As you can see, we are the result of billions of years of evolution. We are still evolving to this day. Every living thing we see today has ancestry that goes back millions of years. Dogs descended from wolves, cats descended from the Proilurus, birds descended from dinosaurs, all of them shaped by the world around them, adapting to their environments, breeding, and surviving. It's a constant arms race. We are the result of millions of years of fighting for survival. That is what evolution is. To conclude this video, I recommend 3 books on this topic. On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, and Why Evolution is True by Jerry A. Coyne. So, why is knowing evolution so important? It is because it helps us understand that we are all related, that humans and animals have the same ancestry. It brings us all together. It enables us to understand ourselves better. It is our biological history. It helps us appreciate the beauty and the majesty of all the animals we share our planet with. It's an expression of love to our beloved animal friends, which extends to the love for nature. It gives us a chance to appreciate nature, to practice gratitude for what we have. Therefore, embracing our natural history is good for our mental health. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been enlightening to you. Take good care of yourselves.